Okay, just checking here. Here we go. Let's see. Hey, here we go. Okay, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I hope we have the captions running. There we go. Excellent. Thanks. All right. And okay. Hi, everybody. A few technical glitches there. You can imagine what putting this kind of event on and having our speakers in a Zoom meeting and then streaming to YouTube. But it seems like we got there in the end. So hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Chris Law, and this is the Digital Accessibility Legal Summit update from some of the speakers at the summit. The summit is now going to take place in June. We'll give you some more details on that soon. I wanted to start off obviously saying that you know, this is one of those we're all in this together moments that everybody's having, and this is no exception. We have a lot of people coming together to hold this event today. So thanks you, the audience, for joining us. My sincere thanks to our speakers today and at the summit, and sincere thanks to Matt May and the team for putting on the Future Date conference. So it's fantastic what you've been able to achieve. So thank you so much. I also want to thank those who have already registered for the event for sticking with us. Today, we were supposed to be in the middle of the event, and if you've already registered, you'll be getting notification of the new schedule very soon. So I also want to thank our venue, the American University Washington College of Law, where we were supposed to be having the in-person event. They kindly allowed us to defer all of our payments of deposits, to defer that to next year. So next spring we'll be back at in Washington, D.C., hopefully face-to-face. Okay. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this session is I'm going to turn off my video, because we've got a lot of speakers. We're going to try to conserve bandwidth and make sure that there's very few delays. And so we're going to be primarily using PowerPoints for this. Okay. So I'm going to stop my video and just concentrate on the PowerPoint here. So first, yes, I want to thank my sponsors, Thomson Reuters and Essential Accessibility. If you are interested to sponsor the Legal Summit, feel free, and we'll be happy to have you. In terms of captioning today, the captioning is live and it's open captioned on YouTube. Later, hopefully by tomorrow, we'll be able to post an alternate version that has closed captioning. Okay, it's a long story as to how the captioning happened, so contact me if you're curious as to how to live stream captions out of YouTube, out to YouTube from Zoom. It's has some technical limitations for sure. Okay. Also, I wanted to mention that there's no Q&A. The Q&A session is actually exactly 1 week from now on Thursday, April 30th. You will be able to submit questions for any of the legal speakers, Legal Summit speakers, in advance. Not all of the speakers will be live next week. Most of the speakers from today will be there next week. But if you submit questions for any of the speakers, I will pass those on and get those to them. The YouTube chat today is not being monitored for questions because this is live. If you do post any questions there, we will go back through the chat history and we'll pick out those questions to be answered next week. The Q&A session will be in a Zoom meeting. The Zoom won't be posted on the future date site, okay, but will be linked to from the Legal Summit site. You must register to attend the Q&A if you want to. It's a 1.5 hour Q&A. It's going to allow a lot of time. A lot of people have a lot of questions right now about what's happening in the field. So you do need to register for it, and we'll send you the link for it. Okay. Last year in Anaheim in March, we held the first legal summit, the inaugural legal summit. And we brought together speakers who are accessibility professionals and legal professionals on both the plaintiff and the defendant side. The existence of the summit was really as a response to the skyrocketing number of digital accessibility lawsuits. But there were there was no real sort of forum for dialogue around those. I'm just noticing from the feed, I'm not seeing the captions show up. So let me just pause here just 1 second and make sure the captioning is going on.
The caption is going on. I see it.
You are seeing it? Okay. All right. Very good. I was just seeing a lot of blank on the main feed on YouTube. So, okay. Seems like we're good to go. Thanks very much. Okay. So last year we created this event because there was no forum for dialogue. You know, there was coverage of legal issues in blog articles in the press, but there wasn't really a forum. So these are the speakers that I'm showing an image of some speakers that we had last year. The list of speakers and the program from last year are actually on the website. But what we did is that once the event was over, we had recorded all of the sessions in the event, and we turned them into a Legal Digest book. So the Legal Digest book is in 3 parts: perspective and insights, guidance and standards, and resources. It's 171 pages, so it's quite a hefty resource, and it's actually a good desk reference for anybody who's working in this field. With the situation that we're not doing a face-to-face, we're doing an online event this year in June. What I'm doing is I'm going to be sending people a PDF, a 2-sided printable PDF of this volume, so that you can have it as preparation for this year's event. Okay. Today we have 3 talks. We have Jack McElhaney and Deepa Gori are going to be talking about COVID-19, its implications for practitioners. And then after that, we're going to have Canada's recent regulatory and practice developments from Pina Dintino, Jennifer Chadwick, and Karen Pell-Strauss. And then finally, global disruptions, technology, and inclusion. This is really just a sort of taster of things that are going to be at the main summit. Find the speaker bios at www.accessibility.legal. I'm not going to be doing introductions to the speakers today, because if you want to find their details, just go find the speaker bios at the main page. Like I say, this is really just a teaser. So these are the speakers today. Plus, at the event, we have a whole host of more speakers. I'm just showing some faces today. I'm not going to name them, but the program is up. The program has been updated, and after this session, feel free to go to the site and check out the program. Okay, so April 23rd, today, was, like I said, our original in-person event date. This is St. George's Day, and if anybody knows St. George is a patron saint of England, and he's famous for slaying a dragon. So what I had intended to do at the event was to hand out prizes to any speakers or any participants who could work in the phrase slaying the dragon into any of their talks. And I can't hand out any prizes today. I can't do that through the screen, but I will definitely give our speakers points if they can put Slaying the Dragon into their talks today. So with that, we're going to switch over now to Jack's presentation. And a quick heads up for Jack. The slides are very text intensive. Jack wanted to put as he did last year, he did tons and tons of resources. Because the slides are very text heavy with lots and lots of resources, what we're going to do is we're going to post that probably tomorrow on the main site so that you can download it. So don't feel that you're going to read all the text, Jack. And I know you, well, actually, I'm going to just hand it over to you, Jack, now, because you got it under control. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know everybody's got a busy schedule, so we'll get started. I've asked all my neighbors to make sure they're not mowing the lawn while I'm presenting, and keep their dogs in so we don't hear barking in the background.
And Jack, if you need me to advance the slides, just let me know.
Yeah, do you want to do that, or how do you want to proceed?
Yeah, just say next slide each time.
Okay, next slide. I'm all set. What I wanted to do was do a quick recap of last year. It's hard to believe that the year started just 114 days ago, but the last month has certainly seemed like an eternity. This is a nice graphic that Safe Ashore had put together in their blog that they typically put out related to lawsuits from 2013 to 2019. And the increases have been substantial since 2013. In 2018, it was 10,163 Title III federal lawsuits. And then last year, there was a 9% increase to 11,053. So a very, very busy year last year. Next slide, Chris. In this slide, another one from Safe Ashore talks about the busiest states related to the accessibility lawsuits that were filed. California ranked number 1, New York ranked number 2, Florida ranked number 3. And interesting enough, those cases combined were larger than the other 47 states combined. So those are very active states. Interesting enough, California and New York and Florida are pretty active with the COVID-19. So some parallels there. Next. The topics that we covered last year from an accessibility in the news standpoint were related to really the top 10. Domino's, as you recall, was extremely busy last year, especially with the Supreme Court, all the way down to accessibility in politics, which obviously has been a big issue throughout last year and the beginning of this year, and will continue to be an issue as everything is being prompted to go online, and the Democrats and the Republicans will be discussing that, how to best handle that as we move forward because of COVID-19. But all of the other issues that were covered last year, some of them have moved into 2020, some of them just related to last year. Next slide. And so first quarter 2020. So here we are. A lot of people have been asking what's been going on related to accessibility since the beginning of the year. Well, if you go to the ada.gov website, you can pull up this information on an ongoing basis as they get posted. I have a listing of 10 different settlement agreements that have taken place specifically this year, and I didn't even go all the way back to January. So there's still a significant amount of activity on the ADA side of it, and certainly the plaintiff and defendant attorneys that are on this call might be involved in some of these cases from the standpoint of research. And I think one of the most recent ones that got a lot of consideration was the Kaiser Foundation hospitals. Again, related to COVID-19, the issues with patients, and especially people with disabilities, what type of coverage they're getting once they hit an emergency room related to COVID-19. So you see Tufts Medical Center and Kaiser Foundation hospitals were ones that just recently settled. And there's been discussions with various attorneys that I've had that they're anticipating more types of lawsuits related to hospitals and medical centers. Next slide. And one of the areas that we've certainly seen in the past, but this year we're definitely seeing more of it, is related to mobile apps, and not only mobile apps, but mobile web, from the standpoint of blind users using those devices more often than desktops. And especially as we're in this environment of everything is online, and so much of what people are doing today is mobile, this is going to take even a bigger meaning, I think, in 2020 as we move forward. And then two specific ones that I wanted to mention was Carlson Lynch had filed some complaints for declaratory injunctive relief against Upright Technologies and BYLT related to overlays. Overlays has obviously has gotten a lot of discussions and focus in previous years, and moving into this year, it certainly is a continued focus. And then in March, the National Federation of the Blind and two blind individuals settled a lawsuit against the Social Security Administration. The SAA will improve non-visual access to kiosks. Next slide. And the two big higher education lawsuits that have certainly got a lot of attention for a number of years now, and over the course of this year, we've seen some final settlements. So on February 26th of 2020, Harvard, per the agreement, Harvard committed to captioning new videos or audio content posted on its websites, linked third-party platforms, and any Harvard-controlled domains. And then MIT settlement, Massachusetts federal magistrate judge on March 27 granted a preliminary approval to an agreement with the National Association of the Deaf and MIT that would settle NAD's class claims over website inaccessibility for ADA in exchange for the MIT's commitment to proactively provide captioning for video and audio content. Next slide. And then this year, the Department of Education released their annual report to the Secretary, the President, and Congress. And one of the highlights that I saw in it was the OCR received 2,015 complaints and resolved 1,559 in the years of 2017, 2018. And they're very active in their webinar training from a technical assistance standpoint. And the one area that they did have a significant amount of focus on was the OCR has received enforcement activities related to website accessibilities. And in recent years, a single individual has filed hundreds of OCR complaints. And the next slide will cover that individual. Marcy Lipset, for anybody who is not aware of Marcy or doesn't know her name, she's an education advocate, and she's filed over 2,000 web accessibility complaints and 12 playground accessibility complaints and 100 a year on students not receiving accommodations in the 504 plans. In 2018, the Office of Civil Rights dismissed 562, and then 664, they reopened them on November 20th, 2018. And then recently, the OCR has been determining that some of these complaints had insufficient evidence, and since have closed some of those. So Marcy was nice enough to share this information with me. She was going to be presenting today, but wasn't available. But this is a very, very active area with the Department of Education and OCR, and we're anticipating this is going to be an extremely active year as everything has gone online in 2020 with the COVID-19. Next slide. And so COVID-19 activity, this one image I wanted to show was actually a meme that I received, the relative importance in 2020 so far. And it describes how the different categories of coffee, cars, internet, shaving, alcohol, toilet paper, and sweatpants are either up or down. Coffee's flatlined, everybody's drinking coffee. And there's an image of me on the left with glasses and a suit. That was at a West Point graduation last year. And then the one on the right is me having not shaved for several weeks. And my wife, Nancy, has said that I will be sheltering in place by myself if I don't shave that beard soon. So next slide. And so for anybody who subscribes to Accessibility News that I publish every week, you know that I track a lot of information. What I have seen since COVID-19 has affected all of us is in just my tracking every week, a decrease in accessibility blogs, decrease in accessibility conferences, decrease in accessibility job openings, decrease in reported accessibility lawsuits, and then a decrease overall in mainstream articles related to specifically digital accessibility on a national, international level, and then decrease accessibility statements. Companies just aren't posting updates on their website. And then, of course, we're all seeing an increase in courses being taught online. Zoom meetings, we're seeing a tremendous amount of increases on that. Increased online accessibility training and webinars like today, and then increased COVID-19 accessibility related articles and blogs, which have surpassed the typical accessibility blogs that I see every week. So I'm struggling now every week to get mainstream articles and blogs just about accessibility and not COVID-19 involved. Next slide. And here's a prime example. I just quickly pulled up 38 different articles that I've seen related to COVID-19 and accessibility. So there's a blending of those articles every week, and some of these are blog related, some of them some details about what people with disabilities have been struggling with. And as you can see, it's a very, very, very active area. Next slide. Okay, so one of the reasons why we talked about the impact on, as far as the legal side of accessibility, what's actually happening currently. Well, Paul Hastings is an attorney, and he did a blog specifically about the closing of courts and the cancellations and restrictions due to COVID-19. Law 360 did a similar page on their website related to all of the different courts that have had some level of restrictions or modifications. So that legal activity has certainly calmed down. And so if you went back to the original slide about all of the activity over the last 6 years, well, we're seeing certainly a dip in that. And that's not to say that people aren't contacting attorneys. It's just what we're seeing actually filed. And once the courts start to open up, we should start to see that backlog flowing through. And now it's just a question of timing and tracking of all of this information as we move forward. Next slide. And then, so all of us are secluded at home, and most of us are probably ordering food online. This was an interesting CNBC slide, and what it shows is restaurant bookings steady at zero. This is, for anybody who has ever used OpenTable, as of the middle of March, bookings went to zero for the past month. So there is no activity on the restaurant level other than takeout. And so then the question with takeout is who are they partnering with, whether it's DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber Eats. And then for people with disabilities, specifically people who are blind, trying to navigate the ordering and the delivery apps is certainly a challenge. It was a challenge before, but now everybody is using those devices and those apps, and they're not all created equal. And then to exacerbate it even more, a lot of these companies in the restaurants aren't taking cash. And so the unbanked part of the society is certainly seeing a challenge there. As far as using these apps or trying to use these apps when they might not have actually access to this type of information and technology. So that's something to certainly watch as we move forward. Next slide. And so this is from Blank Rome LLP, which I had read this article, and it's titled, "As COVID-19 forces more to work and shop online, it is imperative that businesses make their website and apps accessible." I'm definitely seeing more and more of these types of articles and blogs, and I anticipate that that's going to continue to happen. because more and more people are going to get frustrated trying to use websites and apps because they're now forced to it, and enable for them to do the normal things that we're accustomed to doing prior to this. Now we're forced to use the apps, and they're not all as intuitive and as accessible as they need to be. Next slide. The state unemployment websites. Now, as of when I posted this information yesterday, there were 22 million people unemployed in the United States, and they were anticipating another 4.5 million to file unemployment benefits this week. And so one of the issues that people are having, first of all, you have decades-old unemployment systems that can't handle record demand, and COBOL coders are actually in demand now. And so one of the issues is many of the websites are not designed to be accessible for people with disabilities, and that is being mirrored state after state. Now, that's not to say that all state systems are having issues, but there are certainly specific states that are having issues. Now, the question there is, does that open up states to lawsuits related to accessibility? I'm not here to say whether or not that is going to happen, but it's certainly a possibility. Next slide. And then as far as unemployment for people with disabilities, that's obviously something that is as an industry we're focused on. Across all age groups, the unemployment rate for PWDs is 3 times higher than those with no disability. Now with these numbers going up and up and up from the standpoint of 22 million to 26 million, the question is, how is it going to impact the people with disabilities? In 2019, 32% of the workers with a disability were employed part-time. A lot of part-time positions have been eliminated. And so again, the question is, what's the employment rate going to be as we move forward with people with disabilities? And an interesting study conducted by the Phenom people, 89 of 100 or 89% of Fortune 100 companies had career pages that did not meet all WCAG standards. Well, as people start to apply for new jobs, that's going to be something that really needs to be focused on, is how up to date is your career page and is it accessible? Next slide. And then as far as traditional work, it's changed for all of us. We're working from home. Students are learning from home. And not all things are created equal when it comes to accessible digital assets and access from people's home office and home or school office. And so from that standpoint, again, IT departments are certainly struggling with that across the world. And as far as equipment shifting from an office situation or a school situation for people with disabilities, that transition has been a challenging one. And I think it will continue to be a challenging one. And we as an industry need to be looking at that and how that impacts people with disabilities. Next slide. And the Department of Education, during the course of all this, Betsy DeVos released the accessibility and distance learning options. Obviously, it's timely information. Specifically, the one part I wanted to mention was, although online learning must be accessible to students with disabilities, federal law does not mandate the specific methodologies by which distance education must be provided. Well, obviously, that's because there's so many different colleges and universities. The range of accessibility is quite polarized. And so from that standpoint, all the colleges and universities, I know that they're working on this closely. And I know from the standpoint of the top schools, it was just flipping a switch. Well, independent school districts, that was not necessarily the case. And I know of situations where there are accessibility issues related to individuals within different school systems. And I know that's something that Marcy Lipset has been getting lots and lots of calls about. So I think that's another thing that we need to start looking at as we move forward as a result of COVID-19. Next slide. Okay, the Media and Entertainment Services Alliance did an article on global digital accessibility challenges. Again, the one area that I wanted to focus on was it's some of these challenges have become even more pronounced since the start of COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has created an opportunity for an entry point for us to have these conversations, because the government tells everybody to go online for services, but mobile apps and websites are typically not accessible to people with disabilities. It's kind of a repeat of what I said. It's certainly an area we need to be focusing on as an industry. Next slide.
Thanks, Jack. And you got about a minute or so?
1 minute and 7 seconds.
Yeah, it's about-
Future web accessibility litigation. With the court filings and proceedings at a virtual standstill due to COVID-19, there will be a backlog of accessibility cases. If past trends in accessibility cases continue at the pace we've seen in the last several years, then it's likely we will see a spike in cases when the courts begin to reopen, which will continue through 2020. And as businesses and schools move more and more content to online digital formats, then it's likely we will see more accessibility complaints and lawsuits. Next slide. And these last two, I thought they were worth noting from Donald Schroeder, a partner at Foley and Lardner. He says, I would expect an uptick in the filings of ADA cases just as a result of the huge disruption of workforces across the United States and the sheer volume of people being terminated. And then Chris Danielson with the National Federation of the Blind. This is a quote: when there is very little planning time involved and a quick ramp up time, we're very concerned that blind students are going to struggle. Next slide. That's it. Here's the information. You can follow us on Twitter, and you can sign up for the Accessibility News at that link. Thank you, everybody, and stay healthy.
Thank you, Jack, and stick around as well for us. Deepa Goria, are you on? Is your mic on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. I was just going to ask some questions following up on that presentation based on the issues I've been hearing about from, blind students and other disability persons with disabilities. So I just wanted to know, have there been any, lawsuits or complaints about online or mail-in ballots? Because I know a lot of states are going to be switching to mail-in ballots for elections, and how are people with disabilities going to be voting equally and independently? So have there been any issues related to that?
Yeah, there certainly has been a lot of coverage on that, Deepa, and it was prior to COVID-19, and the elections and the balloting and the voting and accessible voting precincts is certainly, again, there's the huge disparity within different states. And so that's been a challenge for a lot of people with disabilities. And it's going to be a bigger focus as we move toward the presidential election and the fall elections, is how are people supposed to actually do that if they're sheltered in place. And so it was an issue before, it's a bigger issue now.
Right.
And I do believe that there will be significant focus on discussions on it, because there has been in the past.
And for education and online learning and other issues like shopping for groceries and getting food ordered and stuff like that, what are some of the immediate solutions people are able to get? Because I know they can't file a lawsuit immediately and it's not going to get an immediate resolution. So what are some of the immediate solutions, or are there any immediate solutions that you've been seeing for these issues?
I think the immediate solutions, just like in previous years and discussions with corporations and schools, is to try to engage them and have a dialogue. It's along the same wavelength that Lainey Feingold in her structured negotiation is, pick up the phone, have a conversation first, and see whether or not there's some type of accommodation that can be made. And then, from a legal perspective, obviously talking to someone like Lainey, if you're a plaintiff or you're a person with disabilities that you need to speak to your attorney, I think that's important to have that dialogue. I believe, based on some of the plaintiff attorneys that I have spoken to over the last month, those dialogues are taking place as we speak. So that I think some of this is happening behind the scenes, and we won't be aware of it until some of the court filings are opened up in the different courts across the country. So, but my approach would be contact the individual companies, see if there is an accommodation that can be made, because if they can help one person, hopefully they can help a whole number of people. But you're absolutely right. Supermarkets and restaurants, and those are the high risk areas from the standpoint of people going out of shelter. And so it's really, really important for these companies to try to figure out what's the best way to accommodate. Not just now, because this is an issue they say that could happen again in the fall, and I think it's important for people to focus on it.
And are there also a lot of demand letters being sent, or more of just the dialogue and stuff like that that you've seen?
Uh, From, from the plaintiff's attorneys that I've spoken to, I have heard that they are processing demand letters. And again, certainly the attorneys on this call could certainly discuss that. But the ones that I've spoken to, they say that their volume is there and their volume will continue. And in speaking to Marcy Lipset, from an educational standpoint, the complaints that she is hearing from students and their parents is certainly significant. So I think this activity is happening behind the scenes. It doesn't necessarily, just calm waters doesn't necessarily mean that's what's happening underneath. So I think that's something for us as an industry to really pay attention to.
And Gwen, you mentioned emergency rooms and hospitals and coverage for people with disabilities. What specific issues are you seeing there, or have you heard about there?
Well, so there's two different issues that are going on. Emergency rooms across the country are seeing a significant decrease in traffic. And what that means is emergency room doctors are saying, okay, so where did all the stroke patients go? And where did all of the heart attack patients go? And where did all of the people with diabetes go that come in typically to have, there could be some level of amputations and things that go on. So the emergency room traffic has slowed down, but from the standpoint of the COVID traffic has increased in different hospitals, obviously the main ones in Chicago and New York and in Seattle and Detroit and Boston. And so it's the typical accommodation issues that have been present in the past, but certainly exacerbated even more now. So if someone needs an interpreter at the emergency room with their family, then in the hustle and bustle of these COVID-19 patients and in intensive care units, a lot of things get lost in the shuffle. So from that standpoint, there's more moving to telemedicine. And again, the same question goes: what type of closed captioning goes on, and what is available for deaf and blind people? So there's a lot of issues because we have been quickly forced into this, and certainly in the telemedicine space, some of the different vendors that are out there from a telemedicine standpoint are the doctors using those vendors' solutions. Some are accessible, some of them are not. And so there's been lawsuits, a number of different lawsuits under the ADA related to hospitals and clinics, and what type of accessibility accommodations do they make for people who are blind and for people who are deaf. And I think it's just been that light is shown on that industry a lot more because so many COVID-19 patients are coming in, but the emergency room side has slowed down.
Another
Okay,
issue.
thanks much. We're going to have to leave it there, just in the interest of time. We're going to have to move on to the next session, but thank you, Jack. Thank you, Deepa, as well. Much appreciated for your insights there. I didn't hear a single Slaying the Dragon reference, unfortunately. But I think that, man, what a thorough job you do, Jack, of getting this stuff together and putting it out. So, like I said before, we will put the slides up, that slide deck up in its entirety, hopefully by tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jack and Deepa.
You're welcome. Thanks, Deepa. You're welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to our next talk here is on what's happening in Canada. Our speakers are Pino Dentino, Karen Pelt-Strauss, and Jennifer Chadwick. And for this, we are going to use some video here. Okay, well, just as we get folks on. And Pina, just waiting on you.
You have to turn me on.
Let's see what I can do. Ask to start video. I think you need to respond.
Hold on. Okay, got it.
Got it, good, excellent. All right, and here we go. You are all on now, so over to you.
Okay, and Karen?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got all of you.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about the differences between the brand new legislation, the Accessible Canada Act, which Pina's going to tell us a little bit about. And we're going to talk about how this is different. And this affords me a wonderful opportunity to use your quote, Chris, because each country slays the dragon in a different way. And so we are going to talk about how Canada has been slaying the dragon and how the United States has been slaying the disability barrier dragon as well. I'm going to talk about some of the differences after Pina gives an overview, and then we're going to go to Jennifer, and she's going to talk about the implications for businesses who have to comply with either or both of the laws. So take it away, Pina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. So I want to begin with two thoughts, and actually maybe three. Karen, thank you for taking the slaying the dragon away from us. I think you'll win the prize. But more importantly, I just want to take a moment to sort of just bow and sort of send my condolences and thoughts to all those people who have been affected by the COVID-19. There's so many across the world, and each day our thoughts and prayers are with all of you in support, and certainly hope that we can find a solution very quickly to this situation. The next comment I want to talk about, and very quickly, is as an independent, these comments are made as part of this legal symposium as an independent consultant. I am a consultant on accessibility and work with many different companies and different contracts, the comments I make only reflect what I know and what I do. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. So the Accessible Canada Act, which received assent last June, is in some ways in response to what many other countries have, including the US with the Accessible Disability Act, the ADA. It affects all federally regulated organizations, and including crown companies. And really what it talks about is the identification and removal of barriers by 2040 with the engagement of persons with disabilities for organizations to develop their plans. So what does that mean? It means that every organization will be required to publish and develop an accessibility plan. But all of that needs to be done in consultation with persons with disabilities. It is a requirement, and they will have to demonstrate how persons with disabilities are engaged to that process. Organization will have to do that within 1 year of the law, and then they will be required to report on their progress every 3 years. The Accessible Canada Act affects a number of different areas, including employment and built environments. It includes information technology communications, as we know as digital channels. It also affects transportation and communications specifically. So how do you interact with people through different modalities? And also the design of programs and services. I think what's really important to state here is that the Accessible Canada Act, as well as we see in many other countries, complements already other existing regulations and mandates. And so it does not stand on its own. It does complement our Canadian Charter of Rights. It also complements equity acts, and these are federally regulated requirements, financial services acts, and so on and so forth. As well as it supports our implementation of the UNCRPD, the United Nations Conventions for Persons with Disabilities. So a few years ago, the ACA conducted a number of, over the last couple of years, in fact, conducted a number of public consultations to listen and hear what people across Canada, persons with disabilities specifically, what were some of the issues, some of the barriers, some of the challenges that they were feeling on a day-to-day basis, whether they're out in the public, whether they're touching on employment or transportation. All of that feedback was put into a report and helped feed the development of this Accessibility Act. I think the other thing that, you know, we want to sort of pause on is also that it also fed from some of the other provincial regulations that had been in place, particularly the AODA, which is the Accessible Ontarians Act for Peoples with Disabilities, which really has been in place since 2005. So ultimately, it builds as well and uses some of that same methodology where the AODA, for example, area focused on similar topics such as customer services, which one can argue that it's very similar to communication, employment, information communications, transportation, as well as design of public spaces. The AODA also recently presented or introduced two other areas, which is on health, the services for health, as well as education. So those standards are being developed as we speak. So what it is, I think that one of the main differences when I think about the ADA or other global regulations is sort of twofold. And when I look at it from the whole holistic perspective, is that the regulations that we have in Canada, in general, we have the federal that, you know, affect federally regulated organizations, including governments, and we have the provincials in many cases that affect both public, private, including not-for-profit organizations. The regulations, the mandates that we have developed in Canada are often based on a collaborative approach, a proactive approach, and a very participatory approach. So while they're, you know, like the AODA has penalty requirements for non-compliance, the approach really is about, you know, trying to work with organizations to develop these roadmaps and help them get to the end target. It is not basically primarily based on complaints, but it is primarily based on helping organizations get to where they need to get to through, you know, engagement and working together. So, you know, when you look at the Accessible Canada Act for federally regulated organizations specifically, you know, there are also industry regulations, such as those that apply to the CRTC, those that apply to the Canadian Transportation Agencies or the Banking Service Agency. Those are still there, and the ACA complements all of those as well. So it doesn't, you know, repel the fact that they need to be compliant for those. It sort of feeds off of that and builds on that. So I'm going to pause there for a moment because I know that Jennifer, you want to talk a little bit about, you know, how does this translate when it comes to businesses? And then we can go back and forth on that.
Yeah, thanks, Pina. What I was going to say is just based on the sort of work that I've done with, you know, private, large-scale enterprise organizations or on a smaller scale with small organizations. As Pina mentioned, certainly in Ontario, we've had the AODA since 2005, but there have been enforcements, there have been audits, sort of random audits presented, but many businesses traditionally have not been aware of the legislation or not really put any time and effort into it. So they're sort of ill-prepared for, you know, people having a disadvantage when visiting their website or using their digital products. So there's no real sort of culture of inclusion or accessibility. So that the law really hasn't sort of provided that drive. Now with the ACA, it's actually kind of, you know, quite good to see, and it's good news for businesses because it's coming at a time where more and more, as we've just discussed in some of these conversations, businesses are, you know, just through social media, through an acknowledgement of diversity, inclusion in business, you know, innovations in technology, and sort of more of a well-rounded understanding of what, you know, the diversity of people's needs and abilities. Overall, there's been this sort of recognition of people with disability in the community. So businesses are starting to understand that people with disabilities are consumers and are regular sort of active participants online with online services and, you know, within mobile technology. So that has actually been more of a driver than sort of the bottom line, which is the legislation. So we have definitely certainly seen an increase over the last 2 or 3 years, you know, within the business that I work in, organizations coming to us and saying, we've kind of discovered the AODA and now this Accessible Canada Act on a federal level. This is a concern. Some people are in our community are experiencing barriers. I want to do the right thing, and now I see this legislation that's been in place for a long time, and I'm failing it. How can we work together on this? So it's actually been there's a really strong, at least in Ontario, there's been a buzz about accessibility for some time, recognizing that it's good business. To include more people, you invite more people to experience your product or, you know, use your services. There's a return on investment sort of increase in sales. There's those kind of opportunities, and for business itself are actually the arguments that seem to drive the conversation or seem to get through to businesses. Pina, would you say the same? Is there anything else that I've sort of missed? Because the AODA is actually, yes, sorry, just going to say the AODA itself is actually recognized internationally because it includes WCAG 2.0 and hopefully with the ACA 2.1 as a, you know, an official standard for accessibility online, which is pretty powerful. So yeah,
just,
anything else to add to what I've said?
Yes, so the AODA has been refreshed. In fact, one of the requirements of the AODA is that every single standard has to be reviewed every 5 years. And we have recently reviewed the employment standards and information and communication standards and have recommended that there is a move to 2.1, WCAG 2.1. I think that will be well on its way. I think from the business perspective, as you mentioned, you know, I think whether you're working with large organizations or you're working with the government or you're working even with smaller organizations, the COVID-19 has really heightened that momentum for accessibility. Sadly, I guess in a way, when you think as advocates, we've been doing advocacy for so many years, and it's taken a crisis to actually bring it to the forefront. It's sad, but in a way, maybe that's what it takes to sort of get people's attention sometimes, to really understand that, you know, some of the most, marginalized are often left out because of what, decisions we make. So I think that there's a huge opportunity here, that we recognize as part of this crisis that, we need to do this, and we need to do this for a plurality of reasons. And it does make business sense. But, as Jack spoke before, we're going to be facing the new normal, and the new normal will potentially look more like what it is today, where you're going to have a lot of people working remotely because there are numerous advantages to doing so. And as such, if you do, in fact, are committed and really, truly want to hire persons with disabilities, your platforms have to be accessible. I think that, as part of the initiatives around the ACA, as well as the AODA and other, because we have other provinces as well in Canada who have put out provincial regulations as well, such as Manitoba, Nova Scotia, BC. What we're seeing too is that, there's an appetite for harmonization. There's an appetite to also respond to global needs and what's happening, on an international level, and also, the impact and the power of how do we make this happen through procurement, for example.
So let's just jump in there, if you don't mind, just because we have limited time.
Sure.
We're going to be exploring a lot more in the full-length webinar in terms of what laws to use and how best to go about implementation. I do want to just take an opportunity before I talk about the differences in the laws to mention something that kind of dovetails with all of this with respect to people who are deaf and hard of hearing. It's not just websites that are the problem. There's a huge problem right now because people are using masks, and people who can't hear cannot have the additional cues of lip reading. Not that lip reading is sufficient, but it provides additional information about what a person is saying, what they're feeling, etc. And the other big problem is that interpreters often work from call centers, and they don't want to go into those call centers anymore. So interpreters that are providing services from relay companies, or even remotely, they do not want to be on site in the hospitals, but yet they have a problem accessing remotely from call centers. They have to be moving to their homes. So a lot of the relay operators are moving to their homes. Anyway, I'm just throwing this out. It doesn't necessarily pertain to our subject, but it's another very significant problem that, as you point out, is part of the new normal, at least for now and for an extended period of time, that we have to think about what happens if people cannot get to their jobs and they have jobs that require interaction with people who have disabilities. But going back to our theme, one of the things that I wanted to mention is I want to actually touch, Pina, on one thing that you said in terms of a difference between the Canada law and the United States laws. And I can't really compare the Accessible Canada Act with any one US law because it kind of overlaps on a lot of different laws. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, and Section 508. It kind of covers pieces of each one. It mostly focuses, it does focus on federal sectors and federally regulated activities. So in that sense, it's different than the CVAA, the 21st Century Communications and Accessibility Act, and the ADA, because those go out to private entities. You don't have to be federally regulated. For the most part, the communications companies that are covered under the CVAA are federally regulated, but that's not the criteria. It basically reaches private entities and places of public accommodation. Another difference is that your law covers only services and the CVAA covers products. So it covers those mobile phones. It's interesting to me because when we look at all these lawsuits, you'll see that they're not against the telephone companies or manufacturers that are producing the phones and the laptops and the computers, because they're covered by the CVAA. So at least we've gotten that end of things. I mean, it's half of the equation and it's not enough, but at least to a certain extent, we're not seeing a whole lot of complaints in that direction. You also talked about collaboration. I love the emphasis that your law has on collaboration and a participatory approach. Our laws don't necessarily say it in the law, but if you look at how different agencies have approached compliance and implementation, you'll see that many have in fact focused on collaboration. When I worked at the Federal Communications Commission, we did not adopt a single rule out of maybe 20 to 30 rules that we adopted to implement the CVAA without first bringing everyone in. The consumers, the industry, potentially even other government agencies like the Department of Justice or FEMA. If they were going to be anybody that was going to potentially be affected by our rules, we brought in and we sat with them over and over and over again in multiple meetings to try to work out all the differences beforehand so that we could too reach our final target of providing access and not having litigation once those rules were issued. And it worked. There were no challenges, absolutely not a single challenge against any of the FCC rules that were issued. So I really applaud Canada for taking that approach as well. One thing that is a little bit different, and I think that this is something to explore in the next round, is your regulatory process. I think it's a little different than ours. We are more mandate focused. It's a product of, frankly, having experienced years and years of non-compliance by the industries. And so I'm being told I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to move along. But the bottom line is that we believe in mandates. At least that's what's worked for us. Now, there has been a significant shift in attitudes and culture in the industries as well, in companies, major companies that provide telecommunications and IT services, and they're much more attuned to the needs of people with disabilities. They have accessibility teams, leaders that are making powerful statements in terms of what they do to provide access. And so fortunately, at least under the CBA, there have been no formal complaints. There again, there's been no litigation, but that's only on that side of the fence. That's not on the website side. I think that that's about it in terms of the major differences. Oh, one other difference is who gets to enforce it. The mandates as well as other requirements. Your law depends on who is covering, which is the regulating entity. At least for the CBA, it's all the FCC. So there are some differences there as well, although for 508, it does depend on the agency. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there are any concluding remarks. I think we're just about out of time.
Well, very quickly,
Yeah,
I want to
just real quick. Yeah, thank you.
very quickly, I want to say, so yes, we'll talk more about this in the next session because I think it's a very in-depth discussion, but products are covered just differently. They're covered in the industries, as you know, the CVA and the CRTC work very closely with that. So I think we can talk more about that in our next session. But I think I want to just close with this and sort of say that, you know, why is this important for Americans or other countries to know about the ACA? You know, we're working and living in a much more global world nowadays. And I think, you know, for larger companies who are doing businesses in many different countries and many different provinces, I think it's important to make sure that we are aligned when it comes to accessibility and aim for the highest level so that we can meet as many of the regulations that exist today.
And with that, a little bit of feedback loop. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Pina. Thank you, Jennifer. That was terrific. Yeah, in the main summit that we'll hold in June, we will be doing. We'll be holding this as an hour-long session. Be a lot more time, a lot more opportunity for direct questions. And again, any questions that people have, we'll be sending out instructions to them soon. So thank you so much, and much appreciated. And now we are going to switch gears with a presentation from Deborah Rue. And Deborah, do we have you on audio? And,
I am here.
Oh, we got some feedback. I'm gonna get everybody else off. Okay, good. Very good. And I think I'll just have to advance the slides for you. So just let me know and you say next slide and I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chris, thank you so much for having me here. And we do really appreciate being part of the Accessibility Day with Matt May. So kudos to them too. It's very important that we keep getting this work out. I don't know if that feedback is on my end. Let me try this and see if this helps.
Yeah, I think you have your speakers turned on as well as your video.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I don't know, but I turned it off just in case.
There you go. Okay, we still got you.
All right, cool. Thank you so much. So want to make sure that first of all, Karen gets the prize for doing the slaying the dragon. But if we really did have dragons, maybe we shouldn't slay them because we're really bad about taking care of our environment. So, but I also want to say that I really miss Karen Strauss being in a leadership position with the United States government because we don't have enough people in our government really collaborating. And I also wanted to point out, mention something that Pina was talking about and Jennifer as well, that you cannot look at this just from the lens of one country. We are global, everyone's global. And so I always talk to my clients and tell them, if you're only looking at this from the lens of, say, the ADA or the Rehabilitation Act, Section 508, and you are a global firm or you have a footprint outside that one country, you really need to understand what all the laws are. So thank you once again, Chris, for having me. You can advance the slide. I don't want to, you can advance again. I always put the introduction in there, but I don't want to brag about myself. Next slide. Thank you. Oh, okay, we'll go back. Anyway,
You on the previous or this
I
one?
wanted the one right after the my introduction slide.
This one?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So I appreciate being invited. I've been in the accessibility field since the beginning of, well, really 2001. That really wasn't the beginning, but I started this because my daughter. I started in this field. My daughter, I have her on the screen here. Sarah was born with Down syndrome. And I was just really, really shocked at how many barriers she faced, and how even when we first started talking about employing her in the future, her being in the workforce, that the experts just really didn't think she could add any value anywhere, which I totally disagreed with. So I really am proud to be part of this community, and I often remind the community that, you know, 80% of the community have hidden or invisible disabilities. So we are much stronger than people realize, but we are facing quite a few barriers, including, once again, the stay home, stay safe, which is very important. I'm sheltering from home here. And like many of you are, we are watching the ridiculousness from some of our political leaders as this goes on, but it is critical to me to stay home because I want to protect people like my daughter, who is in a supported apartment living, but also my husband has very advanced dementia. And we know that COVID-19 is attacking the brain as well. And so more and more people are having strokes. So it's just a really, really critical time. But at the same time, for years and years and years, we have been saying you need to make things accessible. We need accessibility, not just for the disenfranchised parts of our population, but for everyone. Why build technology that 20% of the population, or if you're going with American, you know, I mean, maybe it could even be higher, of the population can't access the information. And so during this crisis, we're witnessing so many barriers. We're seeing antiquated laws that are very scary. There's a law that's being talked about in Alabama, whereas if someone has, and I'm quoting the law, severe mental retardation, they would not be eligible for a ventilator if somebody without that was also needed one. So it's really chilling what's happening, and we're seeing a continuing bias problems, conscious and unconscious bias. We're seeing discrimination. We're seeing isolation. We're having people die because of isolation that has nothing, that people that don't catch the COVID virus. I unfortunately have a friend of mine whose mother, she died because she was so lonely, and it's been 6 weeks, 7 weeks since she saw her loved ones, and she gave up. So isolation is something that our community has dealt with for a long time, and it is rampant during this COVID-19 virus. So if nothing else, I'm hoping as we come over the other end to start trying to pick up the pieces, that we're really going to think about why accessibility is so important to all of us and why inclusion matters to all human beings. So digital inclusion and lack of accessibility, obviously they're economic imperatives, and we've been saying it for years, but now people are saying, oh, yeah, what if all of a sudden there was an emergency pandemic and you had to send all your employees home? Can they utilize your systems? Can they utilize your apps? Can they utilize your PDFs? Can they get on? Can they have access? Are your videos captioned? So this will be a good case study for us to use, but it's really sad to watch it unfold. So real access allows all of us to thrive socially, economically, and it certainly encourages innovation, creativeness, and it broadens opportunities for all human beings, which I think is very important. Next slide. I did want to point out something that I'm seeing. I'm a global disability inclusion strategist. I forgot to tell you who I was, but I'm the CEO of Real Global Impact. And I've been in the field, the accessibility and disability inclusion field, since 2001. Before that, I was in the banking industry at an executive level for 25 years. And those of you that can see, I have gray and purple hair, but it's up. We'll see how long I've been in the field. But There are a lot of wonderful trends globally. We were just talking about the wonderful efforts that are being made in Canada, but we also see, I'm starting to see people not want to talk in some countries about accessibility. They instead want to talk about inclusive design. I was just on a strategy call with IAAP, and I brought it up on there because the reality is accessibility, the term now is being it's sort of being lumped in with the United States. It's being lumped in with compliance and litigation. And I know a lot of the other countries are getting sort of tired of it always being only about the US. That's why I think I applaud Chris for having these global experts on talking about this accessibility from a global lens, not just from a United States lens. I'm very grateful for the United States that we have sued each other, because I don't think we would have had the progress without the lawsuits. And I believe, as Jack said, we're going to have a whole lot more lawsuits. And I'm hoping those accessibility lawsuits are going to come from people without disabilities, because we all deserve to have access. But at the same time, and this isn't a bad trend, I just think this is something that we need to be aware of. There are many designers now using inclusive design, and they're using that terminology to ensure innovation, creativity, good design, designing for all people in all environments, and also designing in a way that it supports social responsibility, which I talked about quite a bit in my book, Inclusion Branding. So, is this true? Is accessibility only about compliance and litigation, and innovation, inclusive design about innovation and stuff? And I don't think so. I think they all blend together in their nuances, but I just think that's something that accessibility professionals need to know is happening, and they need to make sure that we're all joining the conversations, even the blended conversations between inclusive design, universal design, UX, all, user-centered design, human-centered design. I'm hoping that those all in a way will mean the same thing. We have access to technology, and not just technology, ICT, internet communications and technology, which is why the law that Karen was mentioning is so critical, because it considered all the aspects of this, not just web accessibility. Next slide. Thank you. I also think it's very important that we continue to think about these conversations from inclusion and diversity intersectionality. I'm a very, very big women's rights. I talk about women's rights a lot, but I still see the women's rights movement is still not diverse enough. I think we need to make very, very specific, deliberate efforts to make sure that when we're talking about these topics, that we're including everyone. Where are the women that have visible disabilities in the women's movements? Where are the women that have visible disabilities, for example, and they're part of the LGBT community as well? It's very important that all of these movements, these diversity movements, not only that we support each other, but at the same time, we make sure that we are inclusive and diverse ourselves. And I also tell people, because I'm really big on making sure, I believe that representation matters. So if you want to show us that you care about people with disabilities, and then include us in your marketing and advertising. But that's a time when you use a person with a visible disability. So I have the visual cues, if I can see, to know that you are talking about disability inclusion. So I think that's very important. And I also believe, once again, we're stronger together. And I applaud that and continue to embrace the nothing about us without us theory. Next slide. Chris, you can go to the next slide when you get a sec. Oh, I'm sorry. You did go to the next slide. Excuse me. Will you go back one slide? I apologize.
No problem.
My screen was a little slow. Societal expectations had changed quite a bit before the COVID-19 virus. And I almost feel like I was nagging these. I work with a lot of very, very large multinational corporations, and I was constantly nagging them that the younger people, God bless them, they have said, we expect you to be a good corporation. And if you're not a good corporation, we're not going to buy from you. We're not going to work for you. If we are working for you and you aren't doing the right thing by, say, women, we've seen people walking out on major brands because they, or picketing and because they are not protecting their workers during the COVID virus, or there were sexual abuse allegations being made by women that were being ignored. So the younger generations have vowed they don't want to buy from or work for corporations that are not showing us that they care about the most critical problems in the world. And now, once again, with this COVID-19 virus, I think it's more critical than ever. And I agree, I believe that something Pina said, in that we're all hearing it'll never be the same, it'll never be the same. And I agree. We will never be the same. We will move into new normals, but please, can we, as we move into new normals, really include all people, make sure that all ICT, all of the internet, communications technology are accessible to all of us. And we continue to remember that we all benefit from these efforts. We are all at times in a position where we can't see something, or we can't hear something, or we are multitasking or whatever. And accessibility and inclusive design and all those things, they make these systems and devices and apps, they make them easier to use for all of us, including old people like me. So I really applaud all of the efforts that the younger generations are making with climate action, and social impact, and inclusion of diversity. I talked about this in my book, and I'm sorry if some of you already heard this story, but I love this story because I just think it really gets to the point. But if you don't have a diverse workforce, if you're not including people of different backgrounds and people with and without disabilities and people of color and different genders and all the beauty of diversity, you're going to I'm very engaged in the artificial intelligence, especially with the ethics and the biased conversations. But what they did was they took one of the Barbies, and the small team taught her different things through machine learning, so that she could have a conversation with children that loved Barbies. And then they showed this really cool talking Barbie off at a conference. And a young girl asked Barbie a very typical question, I think it was the other way. Barbie said, "So what do you want to be when you grow up?" And the little girl said, "I want to be a computer scientist." And Barbie said, "Well, have you thought about a career in fashion?" Well, once the women in the audience stopped attacking Mattel, it turned out that the programmers were a small group of men. Nobody thought about including a woman on that task force. How about somebody like Pina? Pina's a woman. She is a woman that's blind. I mean, she's a technologist. What could she have added? For goodness sake, what could anyone have added to this conversation? Because all women would know little girls can be computer scientists. So, and also social good. We are expecting, and we have many, many, many reports and a lot of research that prove this, that employees expect their employers to align their business goals with positive social impact. And that means taking care of our earth. That means everything is inclusive, everything is accessible. You are hiring a diverse workforce. Corporate social responsibility shouldn't always be smoke and mirrors, which right now it really is. It should align. And you should make sure that impact is seen locally, it should be seen nationally, it should be seen globally. And that means if you're only hiring people with disabilities and making your websites accessible in the United States, but you have a global footprint, shame on you. Why do you not care about your employees in Canada? Or why do you not care about your employees in, India or wherever? So more and more society is expecting that you be a good corporation. And if you're not, we're going to talk about you. We're not going to work for you. And we will buy other people's products, even if they're more expensive. That's what many, many Nielsen studies have proven. So, and I believe after we, I don't even know what words to use, after we survive the COVID-19 virus, because our economies have been shut down, and there are people, I know in the United States, and this is an old number, there were 12 million people that had filed for unemployment insurance. I know people that have been impacted. It's devastating. It's devastating families. And this staying at home, I'm staying at home with my husband. I have a caregiver that supports my husband and I during the week. But on the weekends, it's intense for me, but I feel so sorry for my friends that have children with severe disabilities or little children, toddlers, or people that have lost their jobs. So it's the amount of mental illnesses that are come out of this, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It's going to be a wild ride. And I think we really need to be very kind and compassionate with each other. We have been preaching for years to make things accessible. This is why. And I think these trainings that Chris does, I think they're more critical than ever. So I really applaud his efforts, because it's been hard, and he's doing a lot of this stuff for free. So it's just interesting. This is not related to the topic except societal expectations, but I hate how in the US we tie healthcare coverage with employment. I'm a small employer and I have to provide health coverage, and over 85% of my employees are people with disabilities, and I'm happy to do it, but why is it on the backs of the employers? So we could learn something from other countries, say like Canada. Okay, I'll stop, Chris. Next slide.
Thanks, Deborah. And about 1 minute to wrap up here.
Yes, and the good news is the ICT is really changing the world for people with disabilities. It can be a great equalizer, but it has to be accessible. So I have examples of driverless cars, 3D printed prosthetics, I can't say that word today, smart glasses, exoskeletons. I love the exoskeleton. So many people need it, but of course, most people can't afford it. That's a big problem. So there's so many huge issues, but I think, we all need to be paying attention to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 goals to help make the world a better place. And of those 17 goals, 11 of them impact our community. So good luck and everybody stay safe. And Chris, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Much appreciated. And thank you for a great presentation. And I'll just stick your contact details up there. But a reminder to people that all the speaker bios are on the website. And so those are going to be up there. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, all of our speakers today. I've got a few final notes for everybody about the Legal Summit program. The program has just been updated. It is now live on the website. Registration will open tomorrow at 1. I've got to do some more updates to the system there. Just to tell you about our program, it's going to be spread over the first 2 Tuesdays and Thursdays in June. What we originally had was a 1-day summit, and now that's going to be 4 sessions of 2 hours each, so that hopefully we can get these into the scheduling with folks, because trying to do consecutive days and consecutive sessions online, we decided that wasn't the best way to go. The steering committee of the conference said, let's spread it over a few days. So, in addition to Deepa Goria's opening keynote, we have a session on cognitive disabilities from Professor Robert Dinnerstein from the Washington College of Law. We're going to do a session on legal and accessibility in practice with this group really represents our target audience, which is legal plaintiffs and legal defendants and accessibility professionals. So we have Min Vu, Eve Hill, and Carl Groves are going to be doing a session on how to get started with any legal accessibility project. Jennifer Chadwick will be back talking about the future with her presenter Jonathan Avila from Level Access. Marcy Lipset. Marcy was mentioned by Jack. Marcy has been busy trying to make a difference. And so Marcy will be talking about why she's submitted so many complaints and about the process of doing that. So we figured it would be helpful to get that side of the story as well. Jack will return and doing a longer, more in-depth, and by then I'm sure he'll have found another 1,000 resources to get passed on to us on the pandemic response and its implications. The session that we had on Canada here, we just gave you a small taste of what the implications are of the fact that Canada is changing its rules now. And I have to say, Karen wins the Slaying the Dragon contest. She got 4, so she wins by a mile. So we'll do some prize sometime for that for you, Karen. Thanks. And then finally, Deborah was kind enough to just give us a quick summary of the issues. And in the actual summit, we'll be able to go into a lot more detail. In an hour-long session. She'll be joined by her colleague, Lamondre Pugh. And so that's what the main program is. There's also a risk course, one-day course that is now being divided up into 2 afternoons. And then there's a guidelines workshop. Details are on the website now. I wanted to mention that the fact that we put this event together because there wasn't a forum for this, and so I wanted to mention what's upcoming with our event and other events. The Digital Accessibility Legal Summit 2020 will be online in June 2021. So this should be an annual event. Our original idea was to go between the East and West coasts. And now what we're doing is we did the West Coast last year. This year will now be online, and next year hopefully will be the East Coast, and that'll be at the Washington College of Law. And we're hoping face-to-face. So fingers crossed, everybody. What else is there out there on this topic? You are no doubt seeing lots of emails from accessibility consultancies. They usually feature a lawyer. They're sometimes a bit marketing, and there's no problem with that because marketing is needed for all companies, myself included. So, but that's what you're going to get. You're going to get one point of view rather than the points of view of many coming together. But there's certainly a place for that. At major accessibility conferences, you usually see 1 or 2 sessions on this, and that's good that is growing out there. I run something called the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium. Legal has featured as a keynote. Lainey Feingold was a keynote 2 years ago. It's usually face-to-face in the fall. We'll have a meeting next week to try to decide what we're going to do with the conference this year. Maybe go online because people we don't really expect that people will be traveling for the rest of the year, really. And also wanted to mention that there's, our event focuses on digital accessibility. There is the NFB Jacobus Tenbrook Disability Law Symposium that was supposed to be held in March. It got canceled this year due to the event. We were actually supposed to be a sponsor of their event, and we were going to hold a workshop there with Tim Elder and Christina Lawney. So they have some coverage of that. Look out for that happening again in March 2021, and then our event will probably follow that in the spring. We do want you to stay in touch. We have an email mailing list. You can find that on our website, www.accessibility.legal. We'd like to thank Thomson Reuters, Essential Accessibility. My company is called Accessibility Track. In addition to the full program and the registration that's out there on the website, please just look over the other resources that are provided. We're going to be posting some more resources, and there's more on the site than just the program and the registration. We're going to try to make this a real sort of resource hub for issues in this. And And if you register, there is the book. We'll be sending you a copy of the book from last year's event as well. Registration, as I said, opens tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern time. I do apologize for the captioning. We did a bunch of tests and we were captioning out of Zoom to YouTube. Although the captions, we have a CART transcriber working here, that they showed up fine in Zoom and not so well in YouTube, sometimes on, sometimes off. We will put up a new version of this video with the captions, closed captions, all sorted up and synced properly. So apologies for that happening. Okay, and then the actual summit, just to mention, the actual summit will be all held within Zoom. It won't be a streaming of the summit to YouTube. We'll take that part out of the equation. And so there'll be opportunity in the main summit for actual live questions and interaction between the audience and the speakers as well. So with that, I would say once again, thank you to the folks at the Future Date conference for helping out and for allowing us to be part of the event. Much appreciated. And with that, we're just a minute or so over, so it's time to end. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe, stay sane. Thanks.